Welcome back, everyone. Let's go ahead and take our seats. For our next panel on NextGen and SESAR, we will be accepting questions, so please tweet them and include hashtag NACACFS. I would like to have everybody please welcome the moderator of this panel, Vice President of Aviation and Safety Operational Services at Inmarsat, Mrs. Mary McMillan.
Thank you, Dawn. And again, before we get started, I'd like to give a big round of thanks to Paul and Trish, but especially Steve Hansen and all of the NACA Safety Committee. I think the first CFS that I attended was in Dallas, and I think that was about 12 years ago. And at that point, I think there was 150 participants in that whole CFS. And to see what CFS has done in that intervening 12 years is just really nothing short of miraculous. But that doesn't it doesn't just happen. It happens because you actually have driving force behind it, and that driving force has been my friend and colleague Steve Hansen, but certainly with the support of NACA. Paul, Trish have been absolutely phenomenal in driving this convention and this conference to being actually one of the premier safety events in all of the world. So congratulations. Paul talked a little bit about, in his opening remarks, about the effect that aviation has. If you actually tweak something in some place in the world, there's actually an effect that happens someplace else in the world, and that's because we actually do live in a global airspace, and it is complex. As he noted, the U.S. airspace is among the most complex system in the whole wide world, and again, it operates safely, and much of that thanks goes to each and every one of you who is in this room. As a former pilot, my thanks for keeping me safe for almost 30 years of my flying career, and obviously for all of the traveling public. Again, kudos to you, and kudos for the work that you do, and kudos for actually being here and taking the challenge that Paul and Trish have issued, which is to step up, get involved in your profession, and ensure that not only are we safe today, but we're actually going to be safe in the future. And that's a little bit what this panel is going to touch upon. We're going to touch upon what's happening both here in the U.S., but also what's happening in another big complex chunk of airspace, and that's over Europe. Certainly, Europe and the U.S. represents right now where we have the concentration of traffic. Paul gave you some numbers. We're actually looking to exceed 1.2 billion passengers by 2034. And we're going to be doubling the number of aircraft in the same available airspace here in the U.S., but that's also happening in Europe and in other places of the world. So one of the really key things going forward is to ensure that we actually have interoperability, that we actually work to provide harmonization, that we actually work to ensure that what functions here functions there, regardless of what our baseline is and regardless of what sort of system we're actually using. Because aircraft, again, fly globally, and the systems that we use to guide us in and out of a terminal in Iowa needs to be absolutely the same sort of system that we need to guide us in and out of a place like Istanbul. So what you do and how you do it actually has a real impact and a real effect on how we're going to design the systems for this next generation. We have 4 distinguished colleagues to actually help guide us through what's actually happening and where our successes are, both in NextGen and also in the SESAR world. I'd like to introduce Don Ward, who is actually the manager of the International NextGen office. He works to ensure that the FA systems are going to evolve in a harmonized manner with other global modernization efforts. And I would note that that's not just SESAR, it's not just Europe. We actually connect on the other side of the world to Japan and China and the Asia-Pacific region. And obviously there's activities that are happening there. And he'll touch on a little bit what's happening with NextGen, not only in the SESAR context, but also as we look for that interoperability around the world. Next we have is Eric Risden. Eric has joined us from IFATCA. He's actually just recovering from a bout of the flu, so we're really happy that he could join us today. Eric is a controller by profession, just retired, and worked both in Canada and also Switzerland, and he is now serving as the IFATCA Executive VP for professional issues. Next we have Simon Hokar. Simon joins us from NATS UK. NATS is another one of those air traffic organizations that has gone through the privatization, and it'll be interesting to see if he has any viewpoint not only of how that actually affects the operation, but also how that's affecting some of their research and development into understanding what the technology issues and what the automation issues are, and ultimately how that's going to affect the workforce. So we're really pleased to have Simon. Simon is the Director of Operations at NATS, and his part-time job is just to ensure future ATC within the UK. So again, glad to have Simon. And last but not least, we have your new NextGen rep with us today. Kevin has been the NextGen rep, I think, for about the last 60 days. So he's coming in with a fresh viewpoint, if you will, bringing in that controller experience from a terminal side, but now actually working to understand, how we're going to implement NextGen and what that's actually going to mean to you, the controller, regardless of what your facility is. Just a little bit of background before we get started on the panel. Essentially, obviously, there was recognition on the part of the FAA in the US and all of the countries that actually make up SESAR is that we absolutely, positively had to have some interoperability within the new systems as we actually moved from an analog to a digital world, and how we were actually going to do that, the time scales, the milestones that we had to meet, and recognize that absolutely close cooperation is fundamental to the success. So they are seeking to harmonize and secure the modernization efforts as we move forward. And they agreed to work in cooperation, developing clear communication, seamless operational, and ultimately ensuring that we maintain not just our safety margins, but again, as we start to shove more airplanes into the same available airspace, that we continue to expand on those safety margins and use technology in ways that maybe we had not envisioned before in order to make that happen. There's basically 5 main areas that SESAR and NextGen are working together as we push forward with some of that collaboration. And those include transversal activities, and I'm really going to look to Don to explain to us exactly what a transversal activity is. Information management, we're going to actually be hearing from Simon in terms of how we're using information management in UK and in SESAR to our advantage, and how we're actually looking to automate that so that we can supply the information that we need to the user who needs it in a timely fashion. Trajectory management, you'll hear Kevin talk about some of the 4D trajectory-based operations, and again, you might ask yourself, how does this really affect me today? And if it doesn't affect you today, it is going to affect you tomorrow as the world actually moves towards developing a full gate-to-gate 4D trajectory-based operation. The other 2 areas are communication, navigation, and surveillance, something that we're all familiar with, and ensuring that we have airborne interoperability, and then finally, the collaboration projects. And there's actually one other item that I added onto this list, because what I didn't see in this list when I reviewed this in preparation for this panel, and my question for all the panelists is, where are we talking about the workforce as we're talking about this collaboration between NextGen and SESAR? And how are we actually going to bring the workforce along with us? Have we brought the workforce along with us? And if not, why not? And if not, how are we actually going to work closer to ensure that, again, what you do matters today, but ultimately as we move towards the future, how those efforts actually we're going to build and leverage upon those efforts in order to ensure some of these harmonization efforts. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Don, who's going to give us a little bit of a preview about the U.S. NextGen efforts, and I'll join you guys at the chairs.
Thank you, Mary. And it's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation. It was interesting walking in today. I was just telling Terry Bristol during the break that I walked up to registration, I was looking around, and I double-checked the sign because I really thought I was in the wrong location. And I admit I've had the good fortune to work overseas the last 8 years and just recently returned to the United States. So I have not been to a NAC event for over 8 years, and the average age has dropped so low. I was looking around and I saw these people around me that were in their 20s, and I'm just not used to that. It's wonderful. I love that. And as I talk about international, I hope all of you kind of think, or some of you think in the future about the possibility of having an FAA international assignment, because I tell you there is not a better job in the FAA. But let me go on to my presentation. When I was invited here, as you said, it's a panel about what NextGen or the FAA is doing with SESAR. As you heard this morning, SESAR is a sister program or equivalent program in Europe to NextGen. They started roughly at the same time, so we do a lot to harmonize. But I wanted to talk about a few other things globally, at a higher level, and not just concentrate only on Europe. My good news for today is, even though I brought a slide deck, I'm only going to present one slide. I'll talk just as long. It's one slide. So I wanted to remind people that when we talk about global collaboration and global standards and really where you drive the industry, you have to start with ICAO. That's the United Nations organization that oversees what's happening globally. And it's very important. And the FAA puts a lot of resources into ICAO. There's subject matter expert panels that we participate in, and we send controllers to those, engineers to others. It depends on the panel. We put a lot of effort into that. We send people up to work in either ICAO headquarters in Montreal or the regional office that we belong to in Mexico City. But there is something very important that's happening here that I wanted to point out to the crowd. So a couple years ago, a little over 2 years ago, Michael Huerta started a new global leadership initiative assessing what the FAA is doing globally and trying to make sure that we are taking a leadership role. And in particular, we looked at ICAO and we said, even though we have a few very key spots, and I also saw Steve Creamer during the break, who has the U.S. position as the head of the Air Navigation Bureau, key position that the U.S. always tries to retain. But at lower levels, over the years, we stopped sending quite as many people to ICAO. And Michael Huerta, asked us to do an assessment, and about 2 years ago we looked and we realized, even though it's a United Nations body and the U.S. government pays a higher share of the cost than any other nation, we looked at our participation and we'd really dropped off. We stopped sending as many people up to Montreal in particular, and not as many to Mexico City either. And we're correcting that. So in the last year, we've started sending up more secondments and detailees to reside both in Montreal and a couple in Mexico City, but Montreal in particular, and explicitly say that we want to have more of a leadership role, making sure that we're representing our position, that also we're getting information back. These are very important, and I would also urge you through your career, if you have opportunities to be active in any of these or to look at the positions or detailees, please consider them, because we need that controller viewpoint up there for a lot of the work that happens there. So that's the ICAO thing. Like I said, globally it's got to start there. More to the point of this panel, because it is a NextGen, SESAR, or Europe-US panel, I will talk a little bit about our agreement with the SESAR joint undertaking. That's the commission body that runs their modernization effort. It is far and away the most important bilateral relationship that we have, easily. The FAA has engaged with Europe for many years. Before SESAR existed, we've worked with Eurocontrol coming up on 30 years now with a formal agreement. As soon as SESAR was formed, we started to collaborate, NextGen to SESAR. I was fortunate to be in Brussels, and I saw it form across the street from me, and worked very, very closely with them. We started working with them right away. We signed a formal agreement in 2010, and that's one of the things I want to stress. This is not just something where we get together and brainstorm ideas. It is a very formal arrangement. We have explicit work plans and cooperation plans that people drive to, that we get the subject matter experts. Mary asked us about transversal activities. So we have a bunch of work areas. That one in particular, I think, is very, very important for the future, because that's where we did our ops concept alignment between SESAR and NextGen, realizing that some things are different, but we want to be aligned on key points. A lot of the really hard things that we were trying to do came about there. And it's a combination of making sure that we're aligned as we go up to ICAO, which in the important areas we are, and that actually drove the ICAO Global Air Navigation Plan. But it's also a little bit of the more brains in the room, the better. So there's certain things that they do, admittedly, in Europe better than we do here. There's a few things that we like to say that we do better, and it's part of a different operating environment. And there's some things where they're just tough problems. So getting together and say, you know, how are you going to do 4D trajectories? How are we going to do some of these far-reaching things that you hear about with NextGen? You know, not the foundation programs. So we understood those pretty well, but the real far-reaching. And that was getting together, you know, with us and industry bodies, also with NASA included. And that has worked real well. And you're going to hear some of the more details here, but things that we've filtered through NextGen, performance-based navigation, a lot of the arrival management stuff, improvements to collaborative decision-making, traffic flow management, the Datacom program that's being rolled out now. A lot of those were either helped or accelerated or modified in good ways through our relationship with the SESAR joint undertakings. That's been wonderful. So I'm going to move past that because you'll hear more about that later. And also highlight, as you see on the slides here, Japan and Singapore. And I'll do these together to indicate that if you looked anywhere in the world where growth is really driving stuff, you know, we talk about growth here in the United States. It is nothing compared to Asia. It is just crazy, the aviation growth they have there. So it's not something that we just want to ignore and let them solve their problems. We engage with Asia for two reasons. One, we send a lot of United States passengers, and our carriers fly to Asia, and we want to make sure as they grow so fast that they remain safe and they can learn. But also, as they emerge and become wealthier, they become more important partners. So we've engaged with Japan for over 20 years with our controllers to controllers. A lot of our controllers have this operational meeting with them every year and talk about what's happening over the Pacific Ocean, what we can do to improve. And you also hear later that what happens over the ocean is often a test bed for what we're going to do domestically. So it's a very active group, like I said, very controller driven. It's another one that I would urge you to get involved with if you have an opportunity. The other thing we do with Japan is we have an engineering group that gets together and talk about the nuts and bolts of NextGen and what they're doing with their program, which is called CARATS, and making sure that we have alignment, much like we do with SESAR. And then I also listed Singapore. So we're not just limited in Asia to these two countries, but they're probably the most critical right now. Singapore is a small country, big influence. They influence all of Southeast Asia. 2 years ago, they created this ATM Center of Excellence, and they're pouring lots and lots of money into it. Pouring money into it is good for the industry, and it's also good for us because they're willing to pay for research on some of the real tough problems for NextGen that you hear about us in the budget and budget problems. It's a reality. If Singapore can pay for research to solve some of the problems that we can use, all the better for us, and that's what we're trying to do with Singapore. So this is very new, but it has a lot of potential, so we're quite happy with that. The last thing I wanted to talk about today that people often don't bring up in forums like this is our relationship with CANSO. CANSO is the Civil Air Navigation Services Organization, Association of Air Navigation Service Providers. The ATO is a member. Terry Bristol's on the executive committee. The FAA is very keyed into this because CANSO is a unique and very strong organization that lets us do things that we can't do through some of our other formal arrangements. It lets us reach out to all the other ATOs in the world and work directly with their controllers. There's an operations committee and there's a safety committee. They let us actually get together and talk more at the grassroots level of what those controllers see happening globally with safety issues and operational issues. And we're drivers in both those committees, so it's a very important role for us. It's also, again, it's a common theme here, something that I would ask you guys to keep your eyes on. So I talked about getting involved internationally. I do want to mention, and this is not a domestic panel, but domestically for NextGen, I want to remind everybody that all the programs in the FAA, every single program, and I used to be a program manager, they start with requirements. our requirements all come from the controllers. We reach out to you in many different ways, bringing you in for human-in-the-loop testing, to actually come do detail to Washington, D.C., to move to Washington, D.C., and actually join headquarters and help drive, join the requirements groups. People are hesitant to move to D.C. I don't understand why, but they are. But it's a great opportunity to step out of your controller role and actually use what you do on a day-to-day basis to drive requirements for the future systems. Without that, we can't build the future systems. After the requirement stage, we use you, as I said, for the testing, for demos, prototypes. So that's my last request of you is keep an open mind of getting involved in our program development back in headquarters for helping us build these future systems, because your input is absolutely essential to make sure that we build these things correctly. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the rest of the panel, talk a little bit more about what's happening in Europe. I'll pass it on to Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll go to the...
Oh, sorry.
Okay. And he needs this.
Oh, you need
Eric?
Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. And I'd like to thank NATCA for inviting IFATCA on this NextGen and SESAR panel. I'll be representing IFATCA and give you, as much as I can, an update on SESAR and its IFATCA involvement. These slides were produced by Mark Baumgartner, our SESAR coordination officer to IFATCA. So just globally what SESAR is, I know a lot of you hear it, but it's in fact a single European sky ATM research. This is a short slide showing you a little bit of the history, why we are here today with SESAR, NextGen, and other concepts like was talked before in Japan. Goes all the way back to 1981, where the FAA started with their national airspace system, and ICAO with the fans and the global concepts, and Europe also. So this all leads up to today, where since 2008, more or less, where NextGen and SESAR kind of started together and building these new concepts. I'd like just to say that to liaise between SESAR and NextGen, there was a technical team prompted by ICAO, in fact. IFATCA is part of it. In it were Andrew Beadle, Mark Baumgartner, as said previously, and some of you may know Dr. Ruth Stillwell. She was on this technical team that brought up aviation system block upgrades to ICAO. All right. The single European sky is built more or less on 5 pillars. We can see here very briefly, these are performance, safety, technology, airports, and human factor. What interests us here is the technology side, where SESAR is part, where they drew up the ATM master plan, and with the SESAR joint undertaking, coordinating all of these different projects. One thing that is interesting to note is the last one on the right there is the human factors. We need to talk about the human element. With all this new technology, we must take or make sure that the technology design is not there to replace personnel. It can easier work, make things go faster, and make things go safer, but should not be there to replace the human element. In fact, the human element is a very primal and important part of all of this, as you may see. This is a very complicated slide. I won't go through it intensively, but just to let you know that on the top right part there, the blue part, it's just to say that the single European sky will affect somewhat in the order of 38,000 airline pilots, 17,000 air traffic controllers, and 58 or so thousand air traffic management staff. On the bottom of that blue little logo is another breakdown of how many people are involved represented by different associations. There are 6 organizations, like the European Cockpit Association, the European Transport Federation, us, IFATCA, ATC-UEC, which is the European Union Coordination Team, and some technicians and managers also. So all of these 6 organizations represent staff, and IFATCA, well, we're representing somewhat in the order of 16,000 air traffic controllers, giving inputs to the single European sky concept. What's important to emphasize here is that we've been part of this since the very beginning, and that's a very important thing to be. Another very loaded slide here that I'll go through very quickly. Sorry. These are 6 key features that SESAR work upon and operational changes. They talk about 4D trajectory. I believe Kevin will talk about that a little bit later on. And also the SWIM, which Simon will also talk to us about. And these 6 different key features are what SESAR is actually working on at this time. And they have a time frame where at the beginning they're just in the development stage, and then afterwards they're on a, sorry, I can't read this. They're time-based, and then they will be trajectory-based, and then performance-based. So it's all an evolution. On the right side of the slide, it's more or less all the colors where you see the yellow, the red, and the blue are the flight phases of airplanes, where from airports to TMAs to en route portions, either back locally or en route oceanic to other continents, and when they go through again TMAs and airports, where all this is linked together, and they're trying to make a project that holds itself. So back to IFATCA, what I'd like to say is that since the beginning, the definition, we did contribute to the concept and the master plan, starting back in 2006. And then there was SESAR 1, which is called the development and validation phases. Again, I'll talk just a little bit more on that on the next slide. We were involved in that also. And then the last slide, the deployment, which is called SESAR 2020. It is foreseen that IFATCA will be involved in this. However, at this stage, it's not yet clear on how, but it is. So in the development phase, IFATCA was involved threefold. First of all, in the government's administrative board. On the administrative board, there is one representative and an alternate, of course. And you see on the bottom of the slide, there's the 5 European organizations, which are ATC-UC, the European Cockpit Association, ETF, IFATCA, and IFATSEA. IFATSEA is for the technicians. And each have one representative that alternate on the administrative board. And then on the work packages, everything that's done there, IFATCA has about 40 representatives that work in the different work packages, giving inputs to the SESAR program. And in the validation phase, we were privileged to have the opportunity to send experts in there to make sure that the projects actually drawn up work correctly. I'll go through this slide very quickly. It's just the different steps. The V1, the V2, that were the work packages, and the V3, the validation. So we're just at the V3 now, and the rest is for the future, 4 through 7. So in closing, what I'd like to show you here, I'll put the next slide anyways. All work that's done between SESAR and IFATCA is coordinated by IFATCA's SESAR coordinator, as I said previously, Mr. Mark Baumgartner. So he's the blue oval there in the middle. And all the reps that do work for IFATCA, of course, coordinate and report back to him, which then in turn will liaise with the SESAR project. They meet twice a year, just to make sure that all the violins are in tune. And IFATCA has a 130,000 euro contract with SESAR that enables all of this. In conjunction also with NATCA's Dale Wright, SESAR coordinator tries to have at least a yearly meeting with NADCA reps. And you see on the right bottom side there, that's Miami's picture with the NADCA reps at last meeting. And that's about it. So you see on this slide here, that's the, you see the 2 emails if you'd like to put any questions to the SESAR coordinator to IFATCA. It's there, either cesar.coord@ifatka.org or mark.baumgartner@skyguide.ch. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric. And now
Forgot to say that I'm handing over to Simon now.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. First thing I'd like to say is thank you. Thank you for the invite. It's a great honour to be here. I really appreciate it. And having done a few of these type of things, this is probably the biggest and best organised event I've ever been to, so congratulations from me. SESAR. There's a couple of things that Don said I think I probably need to just to highlight. SESAR is the European equivalent of NextGen. That's right. But it's not a race. And what Don was saying was we can learn from one another. Europe does some things pretty well, not all things. You guys do some things pretty well, probably not all things. But it's not a race to see who can be the best, the fastest. That's not what this is all about. That is not what I think is collaboration. And if we can work together to get to the right answers, then that'll be great. The second thing to say is we're very fortunate. We've got it funded. Whether we're an air navigation service provider within our countries within Europe, we are able to get funding, but we also have the SESAR deployment manager with the European Commission that also provides significant amounts of money in order to be able to implement this technology across the European states and countries. But it's not just technology. You've heard people say it, and I won't apologise for repeating it. It's about the people. Without the people, the technology won't work. Air traffic is considered to be a very highly technical organisation, operation, but we all know in this room it takes the people here to make it all work safely and efficiently. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just talking about the UK, but the UK is an example of countries within Europe. UK and SESAR and European SESAR. And I'm going to focus on one of the pillars using the European language that we use, which is SWIM, System-Wide Information Management. That sounds an awfully boring word or section of words, but really it's quite simple and it's something that we've been doing for years. So NAT's Road to SWIM, NAT's UK service provider. It's not an overnight thing. This is not something that we can suddenly decide to do. It's a journey. And this short slide is about trying to describe that journey, and it's not been a quick one. Simply, though, SWIM, the really key word in there is information. It's sharing information across the ATM or ATC network. We do it today. We've probably been doing it for the last 80 years, but we do it via telephone or an RT call. What this is all about by SWIM is that lots of that happens via technology in the background, so we don't have to do it via telephone call. We don't have to necessarily do it by RT. We don't have to do it by a fax machine. We can use modern technology that's been around for a while. ATM, it's long been recognised, it's based, and this is an ICAO thing, it's based on exchange of services. That's what we do, we provide services. It's one of the guiding principles of the ICAO global operational concept. So it sits within ICAO, as Don said, and it flows through into SESAR and NextGen. And this is about sharing information to provide those services, because that's what we like to do. That's great. That's a whole load of words. You know, it describes a theory or describes a concept, but what does it mean in practical terms? So what it means is, a long time ago, 2005, over 10 years ago, the ICAO set the operating concept. SESAR ATM Master Plan, that's already been referred to by Eric, endorses this service orientation to speed changes to ATM. It's speeded, but it still took 10 years, so perhaps wasn't as quick as what we would have liked then. SESAR then begins the development of SWIM in Europe. So in 2010, this SWIM, this system-wide information sharing, became more of a reality. Within that, we actually started to prototype that, demonstrate it, trial it. And we did that in 2014. I'll come on to see what X-Man is shortly. And now the whole of Europe, all the ANSPs in Europe is now adopting this key technical architecture in the background that makes all this possible. And we have X-Man, Extended Arrival Management, now fully in operation at Heathrow Airport, which is critically important to the operation, actually, of Heathrow Airport. I'll touch a bit more on that again. But not only that now, we've now fundamentally changing our entire technical organisation and our entire business that supports that operation in NATS in the UK based on these principles. It's the biggest change we've ever undertaken, and it's just a small part of the biggest change that the whole of Europe is undertaking. But it's not just, it's a good thing to do. There's benefits to it. There's benefits to ATC, there's benefits to our airlines. I mean, who would not, really? Who would want better, faster, safer decision-making by showing the best picture of what you're doing today and what's coming tomorrow? I think if all of us took a step back, we'd all want that. But it's how and who we share information with, and that needs to be based on what we, as air traffic control and air traffic management, need, not the other way around. And that comes back to the whole people element. Finally, most importantly, or not most importantly, as importantly, is actually with this concept, we're no longer specifically bound by certain manufacturers, certain suppliers. It's much more open architecture. You can go, lots of different people can now provide the service or provide the systems and the technology. So that gives us a lot more flexibility in procurement. It gives us lots more flexibility in terms of price. It's easier to implement because more people can do it. There's many, many benefits from that perspective. So X-Man. X-Man, it's a busy slide, but there's a few key points on there. This is just basically to say SWIM is not about tomorrow. It's in operation today. In December 2015, we implemented it at Heathrow, and that is a SESAR concept. It was developed within SESAR within Europe. Now, as lots of you will know, congestion and busy TMAs, with lots of busy airports, in the UK specifically probably, the most visible consequence of any operational efficiency is those 4 holding stacks that, if any of you have been to the UK, would have gone round and round and round in on the way to Heathrow. It's very visible from a public perception, from an ATC, whatever aspect, it's very, very visible. But those holds are used to absorb excess arrival demand. Now, what X-Man does is that holding is less required because we have high-level linear delay. That's not about adding additional track miles. We haven't got the airspace for that. It's about slowing aircraft down or speeding aircraft up a long way out, where different countries are still controlling the aircraft in order to be able for the aircraft to arrive at Heathrow at the right time. You can see at the bottom of the graph there, that can save up to 350 miles away, we can save 10 minutes time, which is a significant amount of time of aircraft holding if they're holding for 10 minutes. Now that needs lots of information sharing with people that have different systems, different languages, different technologies, different operating concepts. So this web-based service that we have, we now all can see the same information and interact with it and manage and do air traffic control using the same information. As I said, we don't have the airspace to be able to do additional track miles to cope with this. We need to use information to solve the problem. Europe needs to use information to solve the problem. I suppose I ask all of you to think in this room, what problems do you have in your jobs that information can help you with? Because that's how we have to think. As I said, SWIM and SESAR enabled this, If we'd gone through the old conventional models where people would develop their own procedures, their own technology, it'd have been very expensive and probably wouldn't be in for another 5 years. That's how these benefits have been introduced a lot quicker. Really complicated slide, this, but just look at the two pictures, really. Current ball of spaghetti on the left, that's how information is sent around all our systems within the whole of industry. They don't interact with one another, they get sent from A to B. If we make a request for a change or a new piece of information, you just add another string of spaghetti to the great big ball of mess. On the right-hand side, it's much more simplified. Standard data models, a simplified network, and most importantly, it's the flight at the center. Now, that doesn't mean to say that the flight owns all the information. It's saying the information is all in service of those flights. And that's what we do. That's what we do as an industry by providing a safe journey for all the flights that we operate. For me, the best description I've been told, and I'm going to use it unashamedly, is SWIM is really the internet for the air traffic world. If you want or need information, it's available. And this all brings it all available to anybody that wants to use it. Just as I said right at the very beginning, we've moved on from SWIM as well into a whole architecture, a whole business within the UK is changing. And it's a similar picture. One on the left, that's today. That's our UK, I mean, don't tell everybody, it's a bit of a mess. But that's the UK current technology systems and how they talk to one another. There's over 100 systems that we have. Very few talk to one another. Actually, we've got loads of systems that just translate information between one and another. They don't add any other value. The technology is built up over time. It's not a criticism, it's just developed over time. But now, the one on the right, much more simpler. Less than 15 systems we're going to have in the UK, all of which share information completely freely. Not only within the UK, but outside of the UK with everybody else. That makes it more agile, it makes it change much simpler, much more cost-effective, easier. For example, I mean, as an air traffic controller, I would have dreamt of the day where an aircraft would call me up and I'd just say hello. But I used to have to say, you know, speed 123, heading 325, passing flight level 310, descending to another level, going to X, this is my route, this is my speed. We don't need any of that anymore. What if you had all that information available to you and everybody else had the information available to you, safely checked, validated and everything else, how much more thinking time perhaps you have, or how much more capacity, and how much safer it would be than relying on purely voice as we do today. So conclusions. SESAR NextGen supports ATM. SWIM supports ATM. It's not new. It's newer to ATM or ATC, but not in the rest of the world. It can only be safer, really, and it's much more customer-orientated, airline-orientated that we provide our services to. And it's in use already. This is not some weird and strange concept. But I'm going to repeat again, and I'm not going to apologize, it's not just technical. As controllers and engineers, how do we want to use this to our advantage? To better our roles and to improve the already brilliant job that we all do. SWIM and SESAR and NextGen will transform our business, whether we like it or not. So let's make sure we make it what we want it to. Thank you very much. And I nearly did an Eric, so I'll hand over now to Kevin from NATCA.
Thank you, Simon. Afternoon, everybody. Hope everyone's having a great day one CFS experience. This is at least my 12th consecutive CFS. My only regrets are the ones that I missed that went before those. This is an incredible experience. There's so much work and coordination effort that goes into producing this. If you get an opportunity to thank Paul Trish, the NAB, Steve Hansen, or any of the safety committee team that puts on the CFS, thank them. This is a phenomenal experience. It's been one of the best things in my career. The friendships, the bonding with your colleagues. And if you're here today and you haven't attended an Archie League ceremony before, you're going to get rocked. You laugh, you'll cry. It's better than Downton Abbey. Sorry, Simon. So they wanted to talk about some of the direct operational concepts that are coming out of NextGen, SESAR, where those two programs meet. And I decided that when we were talking about the various swim or four-dimensional trajectory operations, what was most relatable, since most of us don't work oceanic traffic, I picked 4DT to try to give you a quick discussion about, because in my thoughts, like RVSM airspace, this is something that will start in the ocean first and then eventually touch all controllers, especially in controllers in the root environment. So 4DT, I want to make it very clear, truth in advertising, that I am not the deep dive subject matter expert on this. I'm so new in this position, as a matter of fact, that the ink isn't even dry on my NACA business card yet. But I had great shoulders to stand on, and there's a great team of people that are involved in these trajectory-based operation projects like TBFM, TFS, TFDM. I don't want to leave anybody out, but it touches almost all of them, the decision support tools especially. This particular project comes from efforts that are put forth from RTCA. You may not be familiar with the term RTCA. I know that I wasn't when I first started trying to get smart on all things NextGen. That's the Radio Technical Aeronautical Commission, and it is a private, non-governmental body stood up by government in conjunction with industry to provide non-binding guidance to the governmental technical projects. So RTCA has numerous committees and task force that it endorses and that underlie its structure. The particular committee that works on this type of thing is Special Committee 214, and our NACA representative on there is Scott Condi, FAC rep from Oakland Center. So we're all about transformation, right? NextGen is all about transformation. Transforming ATC, transforming the management of flight and separation of aircraft. And it seems like it's all very new, and we try to give it all kinds of sexy names. But in truth, we've been transforming all along. The only thing that's new now is the rate of change, the rate of the technology and the evolution of the NAS. So where we've been, we were procedurally based control, where we separated airplanes not from airplanes but from airspace. We didn't really know where an airplane was. Time-based, 10 minutes, non-radar over the ocean, non-radar low altitude, domestic non-radar. That still goes on today. As we've improved technology and have fielded more and more radar sites, it has become more and more the minority, but they still exist. Very inefficient, very non-economic driving for the users because of that purpose. But we're transforming, and we've been transforming all along, and now we currently find ourselves on the cusp of moving from surveillance-based control based on where we know the aircraft is, to trajectory-based control based on knowing where the aircraft will be. So what are the limits of today's NAS as we work it? And you guys know it better than anybody because you're there every day. And how will 4D trajectory-based operations transform operations as we know them? So for one, current airspace management lacks the flexibility for dynamic ops. We all know when on a beautiful clear day, clear skies, everything is humming. It's beautiful. It's an airborne ballet. As soon as convective activity moves into the area, I worked on the East Coast for the first 17 years of my career, so I'm well versed in that, and SWAP and all the other convective weather-generated activities that we do to try to mitigate the harm to the system. As soon as those things impact us, it gets ugly fast. Plan reroutes, we have playbooks, try to fall back to those, but every storm is its own unique flavor of bad. And you can't plan for every possible outcome in advance, every possible contingency. So when we can't do that, we resort to what we do best, right? Bellied up, close, eyeballs on the screen, tactical vectoring. But as soon as we do that, we lose a lot of the efficiencies of metered flight, of TMU, of threshold metering, time-based metering. We can't create new routes on the fly, or our technology, our TMU ANSP support technology can't create new schedules dynamically because it loses all its predictability. And if there's anything that our users want going forward, it's efficiency, although in the age of $30 oil, that becomes less an imperative. But when that drops off, predictability is the next highest value accorded by the users of the NAS. So when we lose this metering, due to deviations from the structured path routes, flows become inefficient, airspace capacity diminishes, and once, as controllers, we cancel an aircraft's RMP clearance, take them off, put them on the vector, or the aircraft requests the weather deviation, and the aircraft cannot maintain or rejoin the RMP route, it requires considerable assistance from us. It adds considerable added controller workload, and also introduces a lot of additional hearback, readback risk because of complicated and cumbersome technology that we put aircraft back on RMP routes. And our current system does not provide controllers with the tools that we need to ensure efficient flow during these periods of dynamic ops. We can't ensure precision routing because we have the aircraft can't fly the RMP routes that we've published that they got cleared off on at their point of departure. This provides limited options to controllers that are in the impacted sectors, increases their workloads, and the weather deviation greatly increases complexity and workload as the manual coordination burden increases. And we've all been there. Is the next sector going to take my point out? Are they going to take the handoff? United 1, when can you turn? Well, we can turn 5 degrees left for 20 miles and then we'll let you know. All these things undermine efficiency and metering ability. So 4D is the trajectory-based concept that I'm going to talk to you about. And there's 4 underlying technological components of that. First one is dynamic RMP. The others are advanced interval management, and there's a couple different flavors of that, some that are already out in the system, ground-based interval management, flight deck interval management, ATC wins, and then the infrastructure, the electronic infrastructure, ATN B2. So dynamic RMP is a data link capability that allows for the uplink of full RMP procedures. That's RMP procedures complete with a track and altitude and airspeed constraints. And as a controller in your environment, you'll be able to either uplink this directly to the aircraft from a playbook that you may have for predictable circumstances like low visibility at an airport and reduced arrival rates, or it could be something eventually, a capability that allows you to actually design it on the glass, complete with these constraints, and upload it dynamically from your position into the cockpit of the aircraft. Today, we only have voice connection with the pilots, mostly in domestic airspace, but as TBFM and Datacom and CPDLC become more robust, you'll have these other capabilities. So dynamic RMP will help to maintain flow and capacity through given airspace when a constraint has been introduced, and aircraft routes will be able to be adjusted using RMP to move traffic streams closer together to maintain the flow or the throughput in lieu of initiating flow restrictions, ground stops, or other delay mechanisms that we normally would do when a constraint such as weather is introduced into the terminal environment. Advanced interval management couples data communications and ADS-B advanced trajectory to allow for maximum throughput without a loss of flight efficiency. It uses guidance provided by the trajectory automation through data communication to exploit ADS-B out trajectory. And aircraft avionics process ADS-B out information from nearby traffic, enabling a more precise location of the aircraft to be used for our calculations and also for other aircraft to build their trajectory and initiate trajectory contracts with each other. The other component is ATC wins. So Simon takes off on his flight from Heathrow here 18 hours ago, and I take off for my flight from San Diego to come up here 4 hours ago. We're all going to land very closely spaced together, but his flight departed with one set of wind forecasts, and my flight departs with another. So when we get to our position where we're trying to be dynamically separated using RMP, his aircraft is using one wind forecast for its calculations, mine using another. So ATC WIN's, the concept is to have a common WIN database that will be uploaded to all participating aircraft so that everyone's trajectory at least uses the same delta. Another term for a shifting change value. So at least it may not be completely accurate, but at least we're all using the same inaccurate value. And then there's ATNB2, and this is the Aeronautical Telecommunications Network Baseline 2. I had some more slides that talk about that, but it's 3:30 in the afternoon and plus, so I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but it's basically the infrastructure, the technological vehicle by which advanced interval management, dynamic RMP communications are facilitated between controllers and the pilots and between airborne aircraft and the air navigation service provider and the flight operations center and traffic management. So these are just a couple of operation scenarios. One's very clear. The sustained metering is just another flavor of what we do today. But you'd have so many more options when this technology is available to you, letting a faster aircraft pass a slower aircraft because you can create this, this route, this alternate route, and space it very closely because each aircraft has a agreed and guaranteed technological track that it's going to use using cockpit RMP technology. And then this one's the more interesting one that I described to you, where a route sector is feeding a TRACON, and you get some convective activity. And this allows you to, on the fly, design a procedure that you could upload to the aircraft that meets the weather deviation need at hand. It allows you to insert yourself into the equation. And rather than just being participants granting weather deviations, we could be more dynamically involved in the positive control and separation of the aircraft, but at the same time leveraging all the other technological advantages and the cockpit technology that's available to the crews. So here's a quick overview of how we can use things, DRMP, efficient departures, lets us have ad hoc departure routes, and route metering, rerouting with metering. So this allows us to continue to meter traffic while we're rerouting in dynamic weather situations. Efficient descent arrival, right now we take someone off, there's a cell sitting right on the RMP arrival that we typically use. So, there's a way for us to continue to provide that efficiency of service on optimized descent, even though the SOP arrival isn't available due to weather. And Metroplex applications. There's common awareness of intended procedures, for all the stakeholders because of, the availability of this technology. And then for the advanced interval management, meter and manage complex multi-stream arrivals, increase metering throughput by increasing compliance with common winds aloft, and leverage real-time data for optimizing routes and expanding ODP procedures. So here's today's limitations. We've talked about this. We lose our efficiencies, we lose our optimized profile descents with weather, and our future environment. We need to find a way to embrace dynamic operations with ad hoc procedures and continue to maintain our efficient operations in a constrained environment. So 4DT technology through dynamic RMP will be the vehicle by which we'll be able to do this. So I know there's a lot of folks that maybe this is the first time you've seen this, or you don't work in a route center, you're not real familiar with oceanic operations, or maybe you're just young in your career. So obviously there's going to be a very limited space here for questions. If you have a question that doesn't get addressed by one of the other panelists or one of the other members of the audience asking the question, and you want to pursue it, by all means email me and I'll track down the answer for you. So thanks again for your time. Hope you're having a great afternoon. Hope you enjoy all the events here today, and I'll turn this back over to Mary McMillan.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks to all the panelists. So again, I think we need to point out that obviously 4D trajectory-based operations is happening also in Europe with SESAR. There's actually some live flight trials that are actually being conducted using this technology and understanding what sort of data link we actually need to input that swim information, into that 4D trajectory-based operation in order to enable this. And I know as a pilot, when I think of 4D trajectory, I think of actually a tube of protected airspace that exists from basically my point of departure to my point of arrival that essentially guarantees my pretty much optimum altitude, optimum airspeed, and to fly the most efficient route and to arrive at my destination without any kind of holding. So that's kind of, like the perfect scenario, but what we're actually trying to work towards is taking, those 7,000 flights that are in flight at any one time and ensuring that each one of them has a tube. Would that be a good way to describe it? So, and again, I can hardly wait for this to arrive, as I think one of the last flights that I commanded into Heathrow, I got put into holding at 17,000 feet, and I wasn't even out of Potomac yet, because we didn't have actually the facilitation, for me to actually enter into the track. So it's not only an issue on the arrival end, but certainly even on the departure end. But I want to thank the panelists. We are actually running a little bit short of time for questions. I don't know if actually Don has any questions that have come in from the audience, but I think actually one question that I want to just pose to each one of our panelists and ask for a short reply is, have we done a good job of actually bringing the workforce along with us so that they understand what these concepts are and how they're actually going to fit into this brave new world that's happening now today? I'll go back to a comment that Paul made in his opening remarks, is that there's 2.4 million manual handoffs each year to Canada, and as we look towards doubling the capacity, that means 4.8 million handoffs. And is the answer just actually doubling up on the number of controllers, or asking the controllers to double up on the number of handoffs that we're making, or does technology have a place in that? And how do we actually ensure that that we've got the right mixture? And so again, my question to the panelists is, are we bringing the workforce along, and can you point to a success and how we've successfully done that to date? And Don, could I just start with you?
Certainly. So the workforce is one of the 4 FAA pillars or focus areas for the FAA. So it's such an important area, not just for NextGen, not just for the ATO, but FAA-wide. So Administrator Huerta, when he was, assigning the new initiatives, he called that out as a separate item because it's so important, and it's something we put a lot of time and energy into. The shift of NextGen is it really does move stuff to more of a traffic management versus broader line air traffic control. But all along the process, from day one, we've said repeatedly, the air traffic controller is the most important person in that loop, and that's not going to go away. And we need more involvement, not less involvement. And bringing the controllers along with all our changes is absolutely vital, and we're aware of that. Could we do more? It's a challenge, and it's always something we try to do our best. But we put a lot of energy into it, and it's without a doubt something that we know our success is absolutely contingent on it.
Okay.
So we don't take it lightly.
Eric.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. As for IFATCA, I can only reiterate that the person behind every technology, even though it's very useful to have and to help us in our work and enhance our work and enhance safety. And I can just give you a very brief example. In Geneva in 2006, we went from analog paper strips to handling traffic to a full digital system with not even electronic strips. We had no strips at all. All the information we had was a click away on every flight data block. And in the past, when we had something like 18 or 19 flight strips, paper flight strips, we were starting to do like the ducks, pedaling like crazy on the water and trying to stay cool on top, because we knew we were going to be hit with a lot of traffic. Today, with this new technology, when we're at 24, 25, 26 predicted traffic, it's pretty still cool. So we're handling a lot more traffic, a safer way, so that's useful technology, and that's all possible if the people, and like I said in the presentation, are from the beginning involved in these new concepts and master plans and what not names that you can give them. If the people, the professionals, are not involved from the definition, design, development, and implementation of these new systems, they will never leave ground. So up +1 for the people. We need them.
Thanks, Eric. Simon.
We could always do better, right? And I think that's important with this. There are some pockets of brilliant examples of where we've taken the workforce and the people with us, and there's some really good examples of where that just hasn't happened. And all those ones that just hasn't happened, it never works. It's never sustainable, and it makes it long, complicated, painful, expensive, and actually you never get the benefits you need. So, but we must two things I want to raise is it depends on the workforce as well. You've got in this changing world of technology, for me, you've got three key workforces. You have the controllers, you have your engineers, and then you have your non-operational support staff. They all need to be taken on this journey. You know, the engineers, to start off with, they're facing some really difficult changes with the technology in the background. Then you've got the controllers that need to use it. And then there's a massive impact because lots of automation on the non-operational side that we need to look after.
Could we not forget the pilots?
Well, you know, they're quite important, really, pilots, I suppose.
I know.
But you're right, it's the whole of industry, actually. It's a whole thing that we need to keep an eye on. But if we can get people and technology to work in unison, there's massive opportunities there. For example, with the new technology that's available, you can very, very quickly prototype. You can very, very quickly change things and get immediate feedback to the controllers and the engineers, or particularly the controllers, actually, that can see changes. You know, normally in history, I can remember asking for a change and then waiting for 6 months before the change appeared, and by that time you've forgotten what the change was, or you'd moved on to the next one. Now you can do it within a day. You can do it within an hour. So you get that immediate feedback. And that's where I think it's critically important that this user-centered design, you can, whatever terminology you want to use, we must include the controllers. We must include the users. We must include the pilots. Because actually, you guys get to say. And the technology enables that.
Thanks, Simon. Kevin, we'll give you the last word.
Thank you, Mary. If you asked me to grade the level of collaboration in the NAS, I would give it an A. Our collaborative efforts are at an all-time high. We are inserted at every level, and we are adding value at every level. As a matter of fact, there are FA managers that contact their NACA counterparts before they contact some of their own colleagues within the agency. For information, we do a fabulous job of pollinizing between the various silos of technology within the FAA. Sometimes, you know, people, well-meaning, they're trying to drive a program on a limited budget to completion and provide as many deliverables to the NASA as they can, and they get a little myopic. But NACA adds value to that by cross-pollinating. Hey, you aware of what's going on in this program? Hey, can we piggyback this and that and get double bang for the buck? So, on the other hand, having said that, could things be better? Things could always be better. There is no point that if an FAA manager contacts me and pitches me on something, I'm going to say, well, that's too early, get back to me when you've done this, or get back to me when you've done that. No, you know, let's get on the calendar. We're there. Let's discuss concept operations and how to move forward and stand this up. So there's always room to do better. And we also still have challenges. Congress has started to earmark and identify more funds for technological change and apportion those funds to NASA. NASA is a new collaborative partner. So far, I give them very high marks. But it's a workforce that's not used to engaging with a big unionized workforce like we are. So far, they show every intent of doing a fabulous job at doing that, but it's going to require socialization because due to the way NAC distributes money, there's a lot of sort of one-man projects out there, and they don't necessarily, have it in their checklist of deployment to reach out to NACA. So it's a very small, very minor thing, but there are still challenges. There's still things that we need to apply ourselves to,
Great.
bring this to fruition across all the efforts of the NASA and the agency.
Excellent. Well, we're at the beginning of a paradigm shift of how we actually receive and transmit information. It's exciting, and I hope that this little preview about some of the things that are actually happening today gives you, again, more ideas about how to get involved and how to be a part of this. And would you please, on that note, actually join me in thanking our panelists, and again, for their time and effort on this panel. Thank you. Cool.